Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Seeking Play podcast. I'm Dr. Jane Hession.
My name is Ronan Healy.
Just a reminder for listeners at home that you can also watch our videos on Spotify and YouTube. This can be especially useful as a number of our guests throughout the season built out their answers using Lego. In today's episode, we were joined by the fantastic Pat Kane. Pat is a writer, musician, futurist, curator, consultant, activist, father, and partner. He is also one half of the iconic pop duo Hue and Cry, along with his younger brother, Greg. Pat is the author of The Play Ethic and its forthcoming sequel, SUPERPLAY. With a long and varied career in media and arts, Pat consults and speaks globally. Pat was and is a lead campaigner for Scottish independence and co-initiated the political lab Alternative Global. Having rewatched Pat's interview, we picked out a number of quotes that we really enjoyed that we would like to share with you today. Play is an indication of your autonomy and self-determination. Rather than think about creativity and innovation, go into the scholarship of play. Realize how important it is for your employees to have a zone of proximal development. Adult playfulness is about retaining a certain amount of freedom within the society that you are in.
For listeners, we have 3 books up on screen here. One is Pat's, it's Play Ethic. And the other 2 are more specifically around economics and the future view of capitalism. So the second book is called Capitalist Realism, Is There No Alternative? And then the third book is Capitalism on Edge. And as we were reflecting on the episode, we started to think that Pat's book could very easily sit within an economics thread, because in his book, I think he foreshadowed a lot of the things we're seeing now in terms of within organizations, like an emphasis on a 4-day week. So really placing an emphasis on being at home or work life and home life, and also greater emphasis on maternity leave and paternity leave for those who are working. But even from a work and in life perspective, there's universal basic income. We have bursaries for artists to try and continue giving them just enough to survive and to continue their creative endeavors, and just even greater emphasis on preschooling. And a lot of these things, Pat doesn't sometimes specifically call it out, but as we were reflecting, it feels like it does sit. And we didn't say this to Pat. Pat, if you're watching, we hope this is okay to bring your book within this economic thread, because if you haven't read Pat's book, it's not just about play in organizations. It really will help you playfully imagine an alternative or an adaptation to our current economic model. So we really enjoyed the book. Obviously, we're huge fans of Pat's work, and we're sure you're going to enjoy this podcast as well.
Enjoy, everybody. Take care. Thank you.
Pat Kane, good morning. You are very welcome to the Seeking Play podcast. We're very excited.
Seeking play, that's all we ever want to do. So
I know. We're very excited to have you this morning. We can't wait to chat all things play with you. So look, we've a lot of ground to cover this morning, so I'm going to delve straight in. Pat, can you talk to us about what you were like as a kid?
I was a very lonely kid, actually, and always my first memory is of crying inconsolably, surrounded by a circle of people who couldn't console me, and me somehow hovering above that scene, looking down on it. And this was my failure to obviously be part of the games that were surrounding me. Spent a lot of time with my Isaac Asimov and Robert Heinlein books, living in a kind of science fictional future, occasionally going downstairs to watch Space 1999 and Thunderbirds and going back up again.
Nice.
And I think probably only really learning how to sort of play with others when I got to university, which was all kinds of play, you know, drinking play, intellectual play, scholarly play, any kind of play you might imagine. So yeah, so I was a very private player, and a Johnny no mates, but I think that also has its resource and muscles that it develops for self-sustaining, being self-sustained by your own imagination. So yeah, that's what I would say I came out of.
Could I infer that the glasses have been inspired by, is it Brains? Was it Brains? On the Thunderbirds?
A wee bit, yes. You've inferred very well. Oh, and this is probably also the beginning of my self-conscious cyborg existence, because I always loved the idea that when Brains took his glasses off, he was kind of a bit of a dullard, but when he puts his glasses on, information is transmitted into his cranium, and he suddenly becomes an. Now, I mean, how prophetic is that? Chat GPT, AI, etc., etc. So, you know, nothing. Obviously, a childhood spent solipsistically with my science fiction influences has been a perfect preparation for 2023. So,
absolutely, Prime Minister for the now. And I think that's a relatively good segue to consider. You know, during your childhood, are there any bumps, bruises, scrapes, breaks, or dangerous adventures that can tell an interesting story of your childhood, but that you think contribute to your identity as an adult now?
Well, I do remember one very vertiginous tree swing, which when I think about it at the time, actually it's near to my home. And I remember looking at it. I looked at it a couple of months ago and I thought, what the hell did we think we were doing? You know, many scores of feet above the level that we should have been throwing ourselves into the void, unsupervised, no helicopter parents hovering around, being injured, absolutely, opening yourself out to injury, not quite predation, although there were a few gangs roaming around in my youth, but certainly opening through play, you know, opening yourself up to injury, testing yourself, the rough and tumble aspect of it being completely, and I remember that as a personal moment of bravery, which I've not really been able to sustain since. But obviously I have a context for it now in terms of all their angst about child development and the way that we are not allowing kids to develop their resilience and their self-determination and their capability by monitoring them too much in urban environments. So that's something I can certainly remember. And a lot of it would be games with friends who I managed to make through playing the game. So sort of nerdiness as a way to kind of build friendships, and that would be nerdiness around comics, or it could even be nerdiness around board games. And I was just before the kind of intensity of video games, so I actually sort of missed out a lot on computer games. But our games were, you know, the capacity of children to project fantasy upon reality, or to turn reality into something else purely by acts of imagination. I was always very fertile with that, and sometimes too fertile for my pals. So that often, you know, sent me back into Johnny no mates land. But I've always had a very, very active, imaginative life. It's always been sustaining through all the breaks and bumps of adolescence, of being educated in an overly formal way, etc., etc. I mean, to recall it quite specifically, I remember being belted, given 6 of the best for being too articulate in an English class, or being too performative.
How dare you?
And I straightforwardly thought, modernity is rubbish. Look at the state of this. I'm being thwacked. I'm being thwacked for being an extemporizer and an improviser. That can't be right. So that's a moment you've elicited from me in a therapeutic manner. Thank you very much.
I hope it was a safe enough space for you, Pat.
It's fine. I feel good.
So moving to now, Pat, could I ask you about adult playfulness, and what does this mean to you, adult playfulness?
Yeah, well, it means something very direct to me as a working musician. So I go up and literally play for audiences 50 to 100 times a year. But it's what's one of the interesting things straight away to say about adult playfulness is that it has a distance from the kind of formative playfulness that we have as children. So we often find ourselves as adults playing in quite formalized situations and situations that have strong conventions around them or that follow tight rule sets, with so sport as the classic example of adult play. So doing a gig, turning up, having this relationship with your audience, having this repertoire of songs. So often it's play as wriggle room, or it's play as reinterpretation of something that people have a very strong expectation of. And that's interesting to think about in terms of what does play mean? Does it mean when you're older? Does it mean to have a certain amount of retain a certain amount of freedom within the conventions of the society you're in, so that you feel like an agent, you feel like an intending, creating, autonomous being, because it's very important for us to feel that way for our kind of essential mental health. And so therefore, the playfulness I do every other week, with the band Hue and Cry going since the late 80s, is a playfulness with familiar objects. So you do an old song that has been sung 30 years ago and that you update it for 2023, or you realize that what it was singing about was anticipating something in your own life or in public life. I think also as well, the last 30 years would see that adult play is often gamified play or gameplay. I mean, I think we have now is a gamer's civilization. It's global, it's multinational, and it happens in real time at various different levels, from your phone to the console to sometimes people costuming in real life, playing kind of LARP games. But I think we have a generation whose way of seeing the world, ontology, posh word, epistemology, posh word, but whose way of seeing and acting in the world is used to seeing a world conjured up through a rule set or through a story or a narrative, and for them to live in that world as in with the same kind of intensity that they live in the non-game world with their families and their friends and their workplaces and their other technologies. So I think that's a massive sensibility, and I think it's constantly shaping everything, from politics to how we do technology, to how we even think about the planet, how we think about the future. So that's, to me, another aspect. And then the other aspect of adult play, let's deal with it. Is adult play sounds like something from the porn sector, right? There's no way around that. But I think what's interesting is that we are in a very profoundly playful sexual moment with the whole question about trans and different constructions of identity. I mean, there's the idea of being self-creating and malleable is moving from the margins to the center of concern. And I think it's sort of it's a bit, we know that play is a canary in a coal mine for various things, but to see gender in play, I think points to another frontier of how people are on a long-term civilizational narrative towards determining themselves and shaping themselves and being creative with themselves. So that's a shift in adult play, which is the profound moments of self-creation are moving from the artistic realm, the bohemian realm, the psychedelic realm, to the center of life. And I think that's powerful, and I think it's a deep cultural logic that we're all having to kind of deal with. And I sensed was happening when I wrote the Play Ethic book in 2004, but I think it's accelerated on a number of fronts just now. And so adult play, I think, and then the other bit of the adult play is financial players. I mean, it's interesting, when I was doing the book and I was looking at this sort of social semantics or the etymology of play and who defines themselves as a player. Well, a player is a sexual player, can be a person who plays the field in that sense, but also someone who's aggressive in financial practice and aggressive in financial markets, and someone who's a self-conscious risk taker with other people's money, sometimes their own, sometimes other people's money. So, and also there is an element of the player that I think is developing, but is generally adult male play. To be a player is often to be regarded as someone who, in one sense of the word, and we know how complex play is as a principle of adaptation, but in one sense, someone who moves fast and breaks things. and asks questions later, and that's often tied with a kind of disruptive male testosteronal phallic kind of process, but that doesn't need to be the case. So I think adult play is a zone, a multiple of zones that's opening up for people in terms of this fundamental logic of self-determination and self-creation, coming from the artistic fringes to the center of everybody's everyday life.
And like there's just so much in that, but I think part of our our existence is to legitimize adult play like you've done, and just see the broad spectrum of playfulness, even down to, as you so beautifully articulated, identity and sexuality and gender. I mean, like everything is up for play, everything is in play. Yeah, thanks for that answer. Like that was fantastic. Like in the work you do, and we were definitely going to get to Hue and Cry. I'm banned from singing "Labor of Love."
Yeah,
you are.
Yeah,
you
banned.
are.
Totally banned in the house. So we'll get there, okay? Because we definitely want to talk about Hue and Cry.
Although I have a feeling it may erupt at some point, but down you go.
I'll just bust that into song. Oh my goodness. If you would allow me.
I'm warned.
If you would allow me.
All right, we're considering it.
But how do you take your work seriously, but also not too serious? I mean, if a lot of people would think artists, it's overly playful, but there has to be a serious element to what you do, and irrespective of any work anybody does. But there's a serious side of things, but a playful side. How do you balance that?
Well, the great New York theologian James Carr says the thing about play is that it takes everything seriously. This is the point of play. If everything is in play, if everything is infused with a spirit of possibility and openness, then nothing falls down the trivial serious divide. You know, there's no dichotomies being made here. And I mean, I'm very philosophical. Just forgive me, I'm quite philosophical about the way I generally think about play. But Carr's in this brilliant book called Finite and Infinite Games talks about the finite game as the win-lose game, as the kind of the tennis game, and the infinite game as the game that is a learning process. And also you even change the rules to get more people to play the game with you. So that's what the infinite game is. So the finite game is a win-lose game. An infinite game is a win-win game. And you know, an infinite game looking at an adult life where a lot of the invitation to us as modern adults is to get involved and be engaged and bring more of ourselves to a circumstance or to a job, bring more of our knowledge, bring more of our feeling, bring more of our sort of sensibility. I think one of the radical things about thinking about this in terms of playfulness, as opposed to sort of duty or company culture or well-being, but to think about it in terms of playfulness and play, is that play is tied to freedom. James Carr says it beautifully. If you must play, you cannot play, i.e. if you're compelled to play, and this is what's often called sort of gamification in some areas. But if you are say you must play, you know, Spiel macht frei is never going to be over the gates of a terrible concentration camp, because it doesn't work. You cannot be commanded to play. Play is an indication of your autonomy and your self-determination. And so therefore it's a kind of a test of your modern, busy, over-compromised, over-complexified life. To what extent do I feel in play vis-a-vis this process or that process? And so I think that's what it indicates. I think it indicates a desire for freedom. And then I think what it can also push for, and there's kind of advances and retreats in this, but I think it can push for what, again, Vygotsky, the Russian educator, called the zone of proximal development. The zone of proximal development is the spaces around you that you secure from your environment, within which you can test out possibilities without them being fatal or injurious. That's the play zone. So to generate a play zone around yourself is not always easy. Some people have a fantastic capacity. Me, as a wee boy with an overactive imagination, had a fantastic capacity to generate a play zone without much effort. Sometimes it needs to be more institutional and structural, and then sometimes even infrastructural and macroeconomic and macro social. So, you know, I used to love all the stuff that was happening. And I think it's interesting where it's gone with Google, when Google said there's a 20% rule. So one day of your week you get to play with your job. And then that went into Google X. which was we are going to have ambitions for the thing that you do as a software engineer, which is exponentially greater than you ever thought that you would have. So it went from a kind of a structure enabling play to a kind of massive game of play. So that's still an interesting process.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that I get myself involved with when I talk about the power of play for people is big old fashioned stuff like shorter working weeks and universal basic services or income, or what that points to as a kind of strata of security of life from which a massive amount of play can happen, or a massive amount of risk taking can happen, because certain things have been secured for you. And again, that goes all the way back to stuff I'm sure we both know about, which is, I think one of the things people get wrong about understanding play is that they think that it's just a hurtle into the void.
Yeah.
Actually, it's a relationship between risk and security. It's a calibration between risk and security, and developmental healthy play. It has the lion cubs frolicking on the savannah with the mum and dad at the perimeter protecting that space so that the development can happen. Absolutely. And I think that sort of persists into kind of adulthood. And there's a beautiful phrase by the political theorist Tony Jute when he says the reason why you have a predictable welfare state is so that people can live unpredictable lives.
Yep.
And I think but I see that within the context of who are we as players, as in to what extent do we give ourselves as animals and demand and secure spaces within which we have optionality and we have options to act and live. So I think play is as profound as that, in my viewpoint.
There's so much in that. I would say, first of all,
too much.
No. Actually, we're going to stop there. We've had enough.
I understand.
We have friends working in multinationals and Google and Meta and a couple of other, but they actually have never been informed of what is play and why do we play. And it feels like they're just missing the context of this environment, highly, a lot of funding, a lot of money has gone into designing these buildings and the, intent behind it, but they miss that piece. So that's one thing we find is, if there's any multinationals out there, you gotta explain to people what is play, why do we play, and then get out and play, I think is a point. But also in terms of your space and time, oftentimes when we're speaking with our clients, or potential clients, who would be described as they're the leaders. And oftentimes it's the attributes of a leader. You need to be this type of leader and that type of leader. And we're just saying to them, let's put attributes aside. There's 1,000,001 books about attributes. Can you create space and time for your people? And it's a nice reframe in terms of, and then we say, okay, and in that, can you play with concepts? So yeah, you just so many other points we could go down, but we won't. But again,
But the thing that excites me about play science at the moment is that there's so many results coming in that say if you're going to be concerned with the playful dimension of your colleagues or your corporation or your workforce, then what you're dealing with is fundamental human nature, and it's fundamental because it's adaptive. One of the great things that comes through from a guru that we both share, the late neuroscientist Jacques Panksepp, when he looks at his range of basic emotions, 7 basic emotions, fear, anger, panic on the downside, and kind of curiosity, care, and play on the upside, and then lust somewhere in the middle, irradiating everything else. We'll not deal with lust at the moment. We dealt with that a few minutes ago. But just to take those 3 pairing against each other, it's exciting for me to be able to kind of sit down with people and say, if you want to deal with the evolved human nature of the humans in your organization, here's a repertoire. Look at this repertoire, and figure out how you're going to operate across this repertoire. But realize that things like care and play, response abilities, as I often call it, not just responsibility, but response abilities, are bolted into your employees as a human species, as sapient species, rather than anything else. And I think that begins to kind of anchor quite deeply a lot of the kind of contingent requirements. We want a better performing workforce, so we want our workforce to be more responsive to conditions, or we want them to be generating more ideas. my suggestion would be, rather than think about creativity and innovation and the usual routines of that and the usual thought exercises and brainstorming exercises of that, go into the scholarship and the science and the evolution and the neuroscience of play, and realize how important it is for your employees as a human species to have a zone of proximal development, to be able to get out of niches by what would look like wasting energy and time exploring possibilities, and also crucially, as Bateson and Martin talk about it in their big book, the playfulness of it. There has to be a point at which it's not tied down to outcomes, that it happens in a space that's generally self-determined. And I've often thought that the organization that bets on human nature in that way is the one that's going to realize as yet undreamt of possibilities for their workforce. What does Walt Whitman say? Do I contain multitudes? Very well, then I contain multitudes. That's what I have. Play is the key in the lock to the multitudinousness of your employees, if that's what you want. And I would suggest post AI, post GPT, the routine and the repeatable is something that fewer and fewer people are going to be dealt with. And then the fabulous question is, well, what is the unrepeatable that is the human, and what is the idiosyncratic that is the human? Again, to think about play in a multidisciplinary way is to get at idiosyncrasy.
Absolutely.
I think that's probably one of the only routes to do that. And finally, on this point, the wonderful thing about evolutionary theory in play is that it does say that healthy developmental play depends on a good ground of play, a structure, an enabling structure. Now, that's what organizations are supposed to be able to do, is be enabling structures for flourishing creatures. The play scholarship, not in organization theory, but in evolution and neuroscience, provides so much resource for better organizations, in my view.
I again, so much. But to bring it back to the workplace and the work that we would do, is that oftentimes this time, whether it's an offsite or a full day or a half day, it's oftentimes layered over with a framework or a methodology. So we're going to do service design today, or design thinking today, or Lean Six Sigma today. So it's already stripped a piece of human agency away. And of course, it enables particular conversations, but also constrains a particular conversation. And it goes back to that play is an indication of autonomy and emergence that doesn't need to be, you don't need to hold people's hand with an extra framework or method. Oftentimes it's just pure play without, and particularly, of course, outcomes are important, and we would work with a client with outcomes, but if you work with them more and more, that the outcomes are less tangible and they will be realized further on in working with us. And again, there's so much. I feel like that's a podcast in itself with us.
Sure.
Who's next?
Well, I think what I would maybe like Pat to do now is, if he could reflect maybe on his earlier career. So if I could maybe just take you back, and if you could think about when you were starting out in your career, is there any advice that you would give to your younger self about either being more playful or more serious in the way that you thought or you interacted with other people?
Sure. I mean, it's quite interesting just to tell the story, because my particularly in terms of music, I mean, I've been conjointly a musician and a writer for the last 35 years, textual writer. But certainly the music thing came out of what I would call post-punk. So punk was 3 chords on the truth, no, no, no. Post-punk was all the chords on any truth, yes, yes, yes. And post-punk, which was often then called sort of new pop, or sometimes new romantic, was how do we take all of that energy and pluralism and possibility and get a hit record? So it was like, how do we then take all this sensibility that we've developed and turn it into top 5 hits or top 10 hits? So that was happening at the same time as through the punk thing was also a sense of that music had a kind of political or social role. I mean, the great song of my youth was that, which I couldn't believe was a hit record, was the Specials' Ghost Town, which was like for them a sonic experiment in sort of seaside town reggae that then hit the Handsworth riots and the Toxteth riots just by sheer chance. A bit like Martha and the Vandellas dancing in the street, landing at the same time as the Watts riots in 1968. Sometimes these things just happen, but when they are incredibly inspiring. Shipbuilding, Elvis Costello, just at the time of the Falklands War. So there was an imperative to at that time for me to be a sort of entryist. I was somewhere between Stevie Wonder and Malcolm McLaren. So that was the idea that these were my two polarities.
Yeah.
And what that meant is that I didn't often enjoy the carnivalesque nature of the pop process as much as I could have, because I was trying to get a message in, or I was trying to get a sort of a statement in. And I some people would, looking back, would say I got the balance right. You know, with a hit record, where the chorus was called "Withdraw my labor of love, strike for the right to get into your heart, ain't going to work for you no more." Well, if you haven't succeeded with entryism with that, then you haven't even. What would success look like? You know, but I would honestly look back at that period and think, I wonder if one could have been a bit more like Prince, you know, a bit more polymorphous and perverse, you know, a bit more sending things out to see if they would fail. Whereas I think I was very much in kind of designer pop mode, you know, that I'd gone through the punk thing, gone through the post-punk thing, now wanted to. ABC were kind of my template for being the kind of band that we wanted Hue and Cry to be.
Right.
And Martin Fry is notorious for saying, I may be wearing a gold lame suit, but I'm still a punk rocker. You know, so that's the kind of the antithesis, the dichotomy, the contained dichotomy that one thought that one was doing. I think it produced as good art as I could make. Psychologically, incredibly stressful. Trying to kind of bring a critical analysis of the current state of affairs into these incredibly trivial and incredibly fun-driven contexts was not easy and often painful, and I often wasn't as playful internally with it as I should have been. I wasn't as considerate of my brother not quite understanding what I was trying to do, and not bothering to sort of explain it. Feeling as if one was a kind of an unguided missile, you know, hurtling oneself into things and smashing them up and seeing what would happen. So looking back on that, I think I've developed post that a kind of a way to, it's not so much well-being as well-becoming. You know, well-being implies kind of, I'm settled now, I know exactly what I'm doing. The opposite of well-being would be a kind of, you know, anarchic, taboo busting nature. I'm somewhere between the two now, and so I pursue well-becoming rather than well-becoming. Obviously, as it has a nice element. It means that you kind of still want to kind of look quite good. You know, you want to look well-becoming, but it's also becoming in the philosophical sense. You know, I mean, but becoming in a state of wellness is the trick. That's the trick, is to be able, and that gets you into kind of complex systems thinking, all the rest of it. But essentially, how do you contain multitudes and not go mad, go crazy, get drunk, go into despair, go into nihilism? How do you sort of contain it within on a kind of bustling juggernaut going forward that contains all the possibilities of the age? So there's a thing about playfulness as a coping mentality. And there's a lovely phrase that I think it might come from Schiller, or it might come from Sartre, I can't remember, but it's the definition of play that says taking reality lightly. That's not taking reality as illusion, and it's not being determined by reality, but it's taking reality lightly. It's going into reality, and by the influx of matter into mind, as Johann Huizinga says in Homo Ludens, making things light, making things malleable, making things movable. And to some extent, that's a strong-minded decision. It can come from nature. It's a combination of nature and nurture. To some degree, it's internal. And to some degree, the external world is becoming more playful. It's becoming more open. It's suffused with networks that generate possibilities rather than institutions that damp them down. The rate of innovation is incredible. So to some extent, ontologically, the world is becoming more playful. And the question is, how do you respond to that? Do you damp it down, like stop it, like Canute, or do you find a way to the posh phrase is adaptive potentiation, Brian Sutton Smith. And what Brian Sutton Smith means by adaptive potentiation, just break it down. Adaptive, it means you're responding to circumstances, but you're responding by potentiating, by being in a place where you can send out prototypes, experiments, live in ambiguity, which means that you're ready for this increased pace of accelerating pace of change. And I mean, it's an interest. This is a real interesting moment. We can do both, and I think we should do both, and so we can both develop our adaptive potentiation, our playful selves, to cope with the future. But who knows how the future may help us cope with itself through AI. And one of the things that's notable about AI's acceleration recently is that it's playing with itself. I mean, just let's be straightforward about it. It's called GANs, generative adversarial networks, DeepMind, Go, whatever you want to look at it. Artificial intelligence developed through gameplay and game mechanics. However it is, AI's learning like children, developing through play is how they are becoming as powerful and as assistive to us. So I mean, this sounds maybe vainglorious and hubristic, but the century belongs to players and belongs to play. I'm absolutely convinced of that as a way of coping with the overall complexity that humanity generates. Never mind having to kind of do play rather than do consumerism as a response to planetary boundaries and material limits. We're going to have to be active meaning makers rather than passive stuff consumers in order that we actually get out of one bit of our conundrum. Again, I think thinking deeply about play and enabling the possibilities of play, that being taking reality lightly and joyfully is going to be an essential character trait for the rest of the century, I think.
It's a conversation that had stopped for us. We think as we hurtle towards greater and greater technological developments, and software mediates that ultimately. We had begun prior to COVID talking to organizations that are actually developing software, just with the kernel of thought that, how would a playful software development team, how would that ripple through in how they develop the software? Is it more human-centered? Is it more playful? Like, how does that translate into the code itself and then in through society, and then society comes back to ripple its way back on how we think? It's something that we wrestle with, and we're going to continue the conversation, because we imagine software developing teams and testing teams actually using this method and standing up and being more embodied and moving more. Because it is a societal consideration. It's an imprint on society every time a piece of code gets written and gets sent out to the world.
It's a very interesting historical question, this, because when I was writing the play ethic in the years up to 2004 and its release, people were invoking open source and agile programming. And the hacker ethic as an inherently sort of playful approach to software development. So the whole idea of open source was kind of like the open Lego box of parts that you send out into the public realm. Linus Torvalds sending out Linux just straight from his university campus in 1996. And so there was an awful lot of, when I was writing 20 years ago about this, there was an awful lot of idealism about code as a kind of planetary Lego box and commons, in which people now. It's interesting what's happened since then, and it's interesting the way that program or be programmed, which was the original ethos of Web 1, went into give me an app to solve me a problem with Web 2. And it's interesting, I think with Web 3, I think there's been coming out of various big systemic crises, whether it was the financial crash in 2007, or maybe again the maturing of the gamer generation as a civilization, and the norms that it brings along that I was talking about. I mean, Web 3 is kind of going back to Web 1 to a certain degree, which is to say, but at a much more ambitious scale. I mean, it's looking at the ruin of financialized capitalism and saying, well, we know how to set up a rule set. Why don't we set up a financial rule set? And also, why don't we make it maybe value different things than are usually valued in the existing financial order, which is one of the most interesting aspects of Web 3.0. You might be able to tie the currency to fish stocks or some other commodity or time or whatever it is. So I think Web 3.0 was an interesting moment where another movement of the dynamism between risk and security that play captures, robust and regenerative structure that generates positive creative activity, which is the kind of the basic play framework, has sort of come back with 3.0. All the playfulness around 3.0, the NFTs, the crazy monkeys, but it feels like we're into another situation again, where what became decentralized is now possibly becoming re-centralized, with the kind of the level of compute and institutional and financial heft that it takes to sort of do LLMs and GPTs and this wave of AI, and it will probably go back again. But I really unless we're into a sort of singularity moment, where the computers play themselves into godhood. I'm not discounting it. I'm just sort of saying there we are. And then I think what's interesting about that scenario, if we're talking about software and organizations, is I think we'll have to reach for science fiction. I'll have to go back to my childhood and go back to the science fiction that out of this crude technology called a keyboard on a piece of paper or a printer imagines how humans live in worlds of their own possibility in sane and orderly ways. So my compatriot Ian M. Banks, science fiction writer who wrote the culture novels, I think, and it's already happening. I mean, Bezos and Musk name their spacecraft or name their processes after characters in his novels, and I scratch my head because Ian M. Banks is a democratic socialist posthumanist. He's a kind of liberal progressive singularitarian who has these books that are all about people who, for fun and ironic pleasure, change themselves this way and that way, have dialogues with vast AIs who regard them with a kind of studied condescension, but really quite enjoy their limited mammalian ways. It's fun, but I can see why Silicon Valley loves Ian M. Banks' work, because the dominant values are not phobia or philia about technology. It's sort of irony, wit, slightly sort of sexy hedonistic creativity, a kind of liberalism that sort of allows for difference and plurality. I mean, and I'm no doubt there's 100 other science fiction writers who have worked this humanistically out at a certain level. But I think that's going to be the next big resource. People who are science fiction historians are going to be incredibly sort of valuable, because they'll be able to sort of point to a novel that is humanistically dealing with these playful possibilities. One of which would be that the technology starts to become our play partner rather than just our play tool. And I think if we can have them as play partners rather than as scary Weberian bureaucratic monsters, that's something for software people and organizations to begin to think about. How do we create a zone of proximal development, a play space between our agenda, smarts, desires as intending fully conscious human beings? How do we mesh that with these possibility engines that are about to come into our midst? Mo Godat has a beautiful, the ex-Google guy, says that, how are we bringing up are we bringing up these children to gamble, exploit, conduct wars? Think about it as a nurturance moment as much as you think about it as a programming or a supremacy moment. And if we're talking about nurturance, we're talking about play, right?
We need a machine Montessori.
Yeah.
Need to
You
look
named
after.
it. You named it. And a Steiner, Montessori, Reggio
Yes.
Emilia.
There you go.
Named it. Well
There you
done.
go.
Sign us up. Okay, so Pat, I would like to talk a bit about your book. The Play Ethic, a Manifesto for a Different Way of Living. Now, we have some excerpts that we're going to just read out and ask you to unpack. But before I do so, I just want to talk to you about the term play ethics. So, a lot of us are obviously very familiar with the term work ethic, but less so probably with play ethics. So could you talk to us a bit more about play ethic and also its potential implications for organizations and society, please?
Sure. I'll tell you the brief story. I was in a rehearsal room with a drummer. The sweat was lashing off him. He was doing brilliant work and laughing all the way through it. And I said, "Sir, you have a play ethic, not a work ethic." And I went, "Why am I saying that?" And then I went and read a bit and realized that there was a famous book by, I just mentioned him, Weber, called The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, which I always thought was the Protestant work ethic and the spirit of capitalism, but it's the Protestant ethic. And I thought, so what would be the ethic appropriate to the age of informationalism and age of knowledge? Would it be, I first thought it was the New Age ethic and the spirit of informationalism, but then I realized actually, if we let's call it the work ethic and the spirit of capitalism. So let's call it the play ethic and the spirit of capitalism, bigger part. So that's sort of where it came from conceptually. And it was a sort of, okay, I'm now going to explore in the way that Weber talked about the Protestant work ethic as the necessary mentality for industrial capitalism to proceed. As in, you apply yourself to the machine, you dump down your hedonistic anti-clock urges, you close down your happy Mondays and you knuckle down to the task, believing that work, no matter what it is, no matter how badly it treats you, no matter how much it alienates you, is worth doing. To a situation where in the age of information and knowledge and networks, you are invited to participate in your circumstances a lot more. Your thoughts and your feelings and your sensibilities and your creativity is more required of you. And so what would be the legitimating ethic, or what would be the general culture of that? It would be, maybe call it a new age play ethic. So the enabling mentality to deal with all these extemporizing, exponentializing machines would be a kind of an artist's sensibility or a child's playful sensibility. And so the play ethic attracted people and attracted everybody from educators to advertisers to technologists to government people, because it held out the possibility that we could harmoniously go into this next stage of civilizational, economic, and technological development. That we could develop and also that was also intended to be a bit like emotional intelligence, because when people heard emotional intelligence for the first time, they thought, well, I thought intelligence was rational. And what do you mean by emotional intelligence? And so I thought the same thing was implicit in the idea of the play ethic as a sort of challenge to the idea of the soul's play day is a devil's work day. The triviality of play. I thought, well, let's actually challenge that by saying that play is an ethos, as a way of approaching the world that is as substantive as work. And in the book, I absolutely get stuck into some figures like Gordon Brown, the ex-Labour leader, who would run around saying that work is what gives us dignity, and that jobs are what composes us as human beings in society. And my experience at that time, as I was writing the book, was here I am sitting with an internet-enabled device, and I can go all over the world and I can find people and connect to people that I've never been able to do. What are you talking about, Gordon? We're at the foothills of of a completely different society here. There's a famous interview that Jeremy Paxman conducts with David Bowie about the internet, I think about 1995 or 1996.
Yeah.
And he's just like, you've no idea what this is going to do to our fixed ideas of organization, structures, laws, institutions, cultures. It's going to be completely revolutionary, to Paxman's great contempt and disdain, but there we are. So when I was writing the book and trying to pour everything I had into the title of the play ethic, I felt as if I was in the early stages of an epochal shift. Really, my sense of that has not been any less lessened over the last sort of 10, 20 years, since 20 years since the book sort of came out. I would say it's a lesson that keeps being relearned. You know, we have, and it's interesting how crisis seems to be the only teacher.
Yep.
You know, so you know, how have we got to our 4-day a week? How have we got to thinking about higher levels of social security? A goddamn pandemic, a biological pandemic that drives us into domestic contemplative spaces, or those of us who are lucky to have those and who weren't on the front line, redefining what care, how the importance of care. Remember the Panksepp emotional primes. Care sort of came straight back in, but also I would say that culture of play, which is about self-development and thinking, I have time, I have free time to be a schole, as they call it, a scholar in Greek, which means someone who is in command of their time. So we all became playful scholars, contemplating, watching things we didn't usually watch, thinking about our purpose in life. And the consequence of that has been, you know, changes in the political economy of the society, for answering a variety of needs. I would say to some degree answering the needs of play. So a play ethos that says, hold on a minute, I'm going to decide my priorities, and collectively you need to support me in my desire here to define my priorities, is implicitly happening and pertaining with people. I think the play ethic, although it's not been named as a play ethic, well-being is often the way that we talk about it. But I think that element of self-determination that is at the core of play has come out through as one of the consequences of the COVID crisis, the Great Resignation, lying flat, the jobs churn, the desperate desire for people to come back into office buildings that have been rented for a long period of time and have to sort of pay themselves off. That's going to change, it's bound to change. But again, if you're thinking about it as in the context of a play ethic, you're thinking about this as a rich, orderly fashion, you know, rather than a scrappy, disorderly fashion or mode of change. That's what I would like people to be talking about in the midst of these crises. You know, not making the best use of a crisis. I think we can make great use of the COVID crisis and the general delegitimation of various official institutions of money, politics, economics, etc. I think play ethic could be a good way to make the best of these upheavals.
Yeah, definitely.
And the book is so extensive, and I just want to acknowledge for everyone we interview, you're literally like we get to meet a hero, because as we were going along, you know, 6-7 years ago, reading what is play, why do we play, like Lego serious play, you'll get that pretty quickly, and we've kind of broken that apart. How we practice it is fundamentally, I think, different, but at the core, it was always what is play and why do we play. So I just want to acknowledge, like, thank you for the rich, broad, like, overview that you've provided, and also the optimism. Like, you in no way, having read the book, was there did it feel like you were naive? There was a naivety to, like, all this free time and it's frivolous. It's very much needed. So I just want to thank you, and also on your journey going through the research, was there a particular researcher or a playful thinker that really stood out as influential for your book?
Sure. Yes, I mean, there's a few. I mean, certainly there's a guy called Manuel Castells who wrote a trilogy called The Age of Information. And he just mapped out all the possibilities of the information age. But at the end of it, he said, what is the ethos that we should be adopting for this age? And he went straight to the S word, didn't necessarily go for the P word, but he went for the S word, spiritual. Okay. And I'm not really spiritual. I'm a bit of a scientific materialist, but I know the space that it denotes. And there's a beautiful phrase, a beautiful definition by Fritjof Capra of spiritual, which is if you go back down to the root of it, is breath of life, and he's a systems thinker, and he's constantly interested in how systems are dynamic and change and evolve, human systems, natural systems. But he defines spirit as the breath of life. So that was a kind of a junction point to go off into so many different areas and places. So certainly thinking about complexity theory, which I'm not going to start talking about at the moment because I'm partial in my own understanding of it, but the idea that there is play in a system, the idea that there is wriggle room in any system, and that makes the system healthy is to the extent that things are emergent from it rather than planned from it. So an awful lot of the complexity literature, Stuart Kaufman, the theoretical biologist who explicitly cites Homo ludens as an ideal in his book At Home in the Universe, but he talks about the concept of the adjacent possible, which is the idea that in matter there is always options for movement of any system, whether it's a molecule or a nucleus or an atom. There's always options for evolutionary change right immediately around anything, which is the wriggle room, the play space at the level of physics and biology. So I was very pleased to read that. Another guy called Brian Goodwin, who was also another complexity theorist who talked about that a lot. James Carse, who I've mentioned before, Finite and Infinite Games, gives you a very, very clear definition of how you should think about games whenever you come upon them in your researches, and also the relationship between a finite game and an infinite game. So a finite game can be at the service of an infinite game, i.e. your infinite game is learning knowledge or a martial art or a great artwork. Your finite game is, how do I get good at the techniques that enable me to participate in the infinite game? And his definition of evil is an infinite game at the service of a finite game. So all your possibility in life is aimed at victory, is aimed at supremacy, is aimed at domination and subjugation and vanquishing of the other. And he immediately says that's fascism. That's what the Nazis were trying to do. And that's been a powerful heuristic and caution to me not just as I go through my play researches and consultations and thinkings, but in life. If I see people pouring all their possibility into sheer victory, I know that the situation's in big trouble and they're probably in big trouble. And if I see the opposite, if I see people training people, teaching people, conditioning people so that they can extend and extemporize their capabilities, not only that they stay in this game, but they can see the rule set so that they create new games, I know I'm in a healthy situation. And that applies to me all through my life, whether it's music, whether it's consulting to organizations, whether it's coming up with artworks and doing curation, for example. The Carse distinction is not just beautiful, but really is a life tool.
I would agree. I mean, there's times it just switches in my head. This kind of you can see fear-based decisions or individual considerations, as opposed to, like you're saying, this kind of like greater infinite potential of like cheering people on and supporting people and like showing people work, like, you know, just not being too involved in the self. And it's in my head, it's like finite or infinite. It's a switch. And that book is quite short, but dense. It's not one thing you're going to read one time, because you read it quick and you think, oh, there's a book, and you kind of tick it as a metric. But it certainly is something that you kind of marinate on and you sit back on and you go back over again and you dog-ear the book again. So yeah.
It's a catechism. It's a theology and a catechism.
It is.
But you know, the truth is that he was studying game theory.
Yep.
Which is you know, came out of the Cold War context, and he actually studied that and saw there's a sort of savagery implicit in this, which I want to find a way to talk differently about. So it's not disassociated from all that thorny, gnarly game theory stuff. He actually reacted to it as a writer. Yeah.
Okay, I am going to read an excerpt from your book, and I am just going to ask you to unpack it for us.
Okay.
So, yet how exactly do we build our societal playground? In the age of workers, we collectively asserted our need for respite and recreation, wresting resources from the grip of industrialism. In a society where players are the primary agents of progress, we will need a new kind of collective commitment, one that can support the broad spectrum of human activities and purposes implied by a comprehensive understanding of play. We need the space to play, we need the time to play, and we need the materials to play with. And of course, we need other people around us ready and willing to play too. So Pat, could I get you firstly to elaborate on play space and play time, please?
Sure. Well, I think this is where the evolutionary theory really helps, and even educational theory, and also the idea that play is a development of the organism. Through play you learn and you become strong and you become capable. So certainly, play space I think is fundamental. It's a sort of defended commons. Whether that's defended by, as I say, the animals on the savannah, whether that's like a physical object in a playground that's well enough built and well enough designed that it doesn't injure but allows possibilities for reaction and play. A box of Lego as a play space, a little arrangement of materials and spatially, and is ontological, makes you think about reality in a different way, makes you think about reality as constructible, reconstructible, and deconstructible. Play time is also important because as play functions for early organisms, it functions in defiance of scarcity. So you have the time, when you have the time to play, you are not under urgencies of food or of shelter or of warmth. Whenever kids start to play in refugee camps, that's always an indicator that someone has enough surplus, or the whole situation is generating enough surplus, and that the situation is knowable enough that when the children start to play in and with the situation, the general overall health and well-being of the community is on a good track. So if that account is scientific evolutionary account is correct, then I think it has huge lessons for society and our organizations. People pay lip service to learning organizations or to lifelong learning or to the educative process. What they don't often realize is the playful seedbed for powerful learning processes. I mean, the most powerful learning processes are playful. I mean, I know we can all quote Einstein, and we can quote Picasso, and we can quote Feynman, and we can quote Andre Geim, who discovered graphene. We're authorities for allowing people to fart about, and that being what we were put on earth to do, as Kurt Vonnegut marvelously said, is happily legitimated from the highest level. But I think the ethology of play, the study of play as a generator of healthy development in complex social mammals, is inarguable. You need play space and play time, and if you need it as a social mammal elementally, and even as a non-human social mammal, how much more do we need it, and how much more can we refine and develop that play time and play zone, play materials as metacognitive, aware, supposedly modern human social animals? We have always had the possibility of playfulness, and one of the things that history tells us, whether it's young aristocrats inventing board games, or the plutocratic patronage of great art, the aristocrats, the Aristotes, those who reserve to themselves the best of the best, have always been very, very playful because they're sitting on material surplus. So again, that's a very long historical narrative that may seem too long for the average HR person in an organization or CEO, but actually you're on a trip, you're on a journey away from scarcity towards post-scarcity. And even though it looks like we're hitting the planetary boundaries within inventing AI, so we are the fecund species. We are the kind of storytelling, imaginative species, as Harari puts it in Homo Deus and Sapiens. So we're on a roll towards the conditions for play in terms of time, space, and materials being more and more available, not less, more available. So it's a kind of civilizational, a new civilizational challenge to anybody who's sitting trying to figure out how to make the most of their workforce. Realize the big narrative that you're on in terms of play time, play space, and play materials. I really do believe that.
Okay. Yeah, I think I was going to obviously, ask about materials and play people, but I think you've covered it very extensively.
Yeah, they're all bound together.
They're all bound together, definitely. Yeah.
I'm going to read from your book. To be a player is to make a commitment to a kind of fully conscious everyday activism that can literally put into play all the structures, routines, accepted roles, and embedded understandings of your life in technology and education, families and communities, businesses and organizations, politics and spirituality, culture and consciousness. So Pat, in your book, you make a distinction between a worker and a player, and you've certainly touched on it. But what is the difference in how they should think of themselves, others that they're around, and their being in the world? What is that kind of distinction?
Sure. Well, I've kind of matured my position from the book a wee bit in the subsequent 20 years. I was writing at the peak of the New Labour moment, and I was infuriated that what looked like a set of objective technological and social conditions were being tied down to welfare, to work, were being tied down to the duteous performance of jobs. I mean, it was contradictory because the creative industries, were also defined in that period. But then again, we can have a discussion about what we mean by a creative industry, whether that's itself a kind of harnessing of deeper processes. So I was an animus against the idea of worker being how we can make the best of this fissile emergent age. And I was also on a mission to sort of redefine that for player. But there's a very crucial part in the book which is about sort of the social dimension, where I talk about the what comes after the work life. What's terrible about the work-life balance is that it's almost surgically divides you between the work that you don't want to do and the life that you do want to live, and that there's an element of tension or swinging between the two. So you live in this kind of fundamentally schizoid existence, and I suggested instead, if we can deal with the time, space, and resources question, if we can get to, I mean, I was looking at kind of Scandinavian society, but I was, which is in trouble for lots of other reasons at the moment. But anyway, take it as read in the 2000s. We were thinking about Scandinavian social democracy as a kind of platform for possibility. I suggested, instead of the work-life balance, unstable, the play-care continuum. So we have two sets of response abilities. Play response to people's infinitude, care response to people's finitude, brokenness. And so that was my idea, that it was my attempt at being realistic about the relationship between player and worker. The worker, people might be dispositionally disposed to routine and to tradition and to conserve-atism. I think we know that from the last couple of years in Western politics and Western society. Some people want to sort of get off the bus or slow the bus down, and I'm kind of respectful of that. I think as a response to accelerated times, I can sort of see why people would want to be workers and give their labor and give their routine to benefit someone else's sense of value, and then be given exactly what they want in their own space. The problem is that the routines of work often exhaust people so much that they don't necessarily have the resources and the energy to be fully autonomous in what is the time that they've secured for themselves out of the wage labor situation. So I wanted to imagine that we get into a situation where We don't presume that everybody's this kind of Promethean bundle of ambitions and possibilities and energies. This sort of assumption of the creative identity as the normal identity. I wanted to say that I think that can be unleashed, but it's not as if you won't be exhausted or tired or feel as if you've run out of ideas or feel weak in a player's society. So we need, the other side of the continuum is care. And I mean, care, proper healing, restoring care. It's not, I conceived of it, it's not, you don't fall down into a safety net, it's a safety trampoline. You know, and you hit the trampoline and you can be on the trampoline if you wish, but you can use a trampoline to get back up onto the wire. But there's no, I wanted to be realistic about the demands of a play-centric, player-dominated society, which I think can just involve a desire for contemplation, a desire for quiet, a desire for repair. If you have taken risks and they've not gone so well, or that you've failed and failed better, as Beckett would say, but you need to kind of go and be in a kind of supported space. So it's kind of science fictional in its assumption. It sort of presumes that people are not worrying about mortgages, housing, food, clothing, heating, electricity, connectivity. There's a sort of fully automated luxury, whatever is sort of presumed by this. And then the play care continuum is, well, who do we want to be? Who do we need to be part of this dynamic? But people who want to be workers, I mean, one of the things I did subsequent to the book was to do a lot of work with social workers in Scotland. And we did a lot of experiments with them. In Denmark, a social worker is called a social pedagogue, a social teacher. So there's a whole relationship there between knowledge and care and fragility that is not the same as a social worker. And we asked them, well, how would it feel if you were a social player? And many of them laughed and said, well, if I was being regarded as a social player, you know, I would never get invited, or I would get invited to different parties, never mind not get invited to many more parties. But, you know, so that was really an education in what people regard as ethical work. And what was fascinating about that and what was educative about that was which the neuroscience backed up for me, the Panksepp neuroscience backed up to me when he identified, you know, care as being a strong emotional evolved nexus alongside play, alongside the darker emotions of anger, fear, and panic. So I can see how work as a kind of the power of routine and reliability can fit for people and also can fit for society. I thought that care was really what the routine part of work was really about. You know, if you want to be present and available for people to sustain them through trials and tribulations, what is it? Are you a worker in doing that, or are you a carer in doing that? Similarly, when you're applying your ingenuity to a task and your ingenuity is surplus to requirements, is that contained by work, or should we begin to call that play? But I've slightly moderated my position. I think some people who want to be workers are emotionally wired for it, and I think that helps them stick to their task. All I want to do is to sort of say, let's pluralize these roles. Let's be as honoring of the player and the carer as much as the worker. So I think I've managed to sustain that. But maybe the gamer generations will start to think, well, to be a player is to be a player in a game, and to be in a game is to be in a world, and it's to be committed to the ethos of that world. So maybe organizationally, the idea of being a player will start to become less phobic or less scary or taboo-like, simply because people are in a large part of their daily consciousness going through their life as gamers in organized spaces. So that eventually, what I think will eventually translate into being a player is having a kind of gameful approach to life, as well as a playful approach to life.
That's a really interesting observation, because of all the amazing books we've read, it's quite likely that it's the gaming industry that is going to help play proliferate through into a corporate sensibility or corporate culture. And hopefully going back, and hopefully podcasts like this will get people to just point back into the amazing book that Pat Kane has written, like all the other people that can legitimize, and all the researchers like Jack Pansep and all those other things. So it's again, this technologically mediated environment and world that we live in is actually going to legitimize play, which is such an ancient, ancestral, you know, genetically encoded piece of human existence. So
people to understand what is play. And I think that that's probably, you know, one of the biggest problems that we have, I suppose, you know, with corporates. It's the perception of what play is. You know, play is not having my workers being productive. Basically, for so many, you know, managers and leaders, they want their staff to, you know, be productive and be on site, whereas they think if they engage in play, then they're doing quite the opposite, but it's not.
Well, it's not, but you know, that I think there's an institutional advance that needs to be made, or a foundation advance that needs to be made. I think it's something I'm always intending to do, and I should really get on with it, which is to kind of do the kind of it's not the prawn cocktail circuit. What would it be for gamers? It would be the kind of the vegan sprout circuit, I don't know, or the hot pizza circuit, I don't know. But to go around the major moguls and say, you really need to be contributing. If play and game is your job, and if it's your concern, Lego Foundation obviously is a great sort of precedent for that. I obviously appreciate Lego Foundation's investment in this and the scholarly investment in this. But it's almost like a think and do tank about play and game as a kind of civilizational resource. That's as grandiose as I would put it. And I don't think we have. And I would have thought that the tech bros, and certainly the video game people, given the amount of money they're making, and given the brutal fact that as a result of planetary warming, we are going to be a more pandemic and viralized society. We are going to have to exist socially in what is called the metaverse and in virtual spaces. We're going to have to be able to switch and flip from real time to virtual time, and real space to virtual space. That there has to be a kind of Carnegie-like, or a Rockefeller Foundation like, or Ford Foundation, or MacArthur Foundation like humanistic impetus to pull together the research and explore how it is that we can be mentally, spiritually, and culturally healthy in a game-defined, play-defined world. Because I can see lots of ways in which it drives people completely nuts. And we already have the cautionary tale. Ready Player One is the classic story, right? You know, where everything is possible in his suit, but he's living in an entropic wasteland. You know, we have to, if nevertheless people are going to be driven indoors by biospheric disruption, they need to be citizens, empaths, and humanists while they're indoors playing in their virtual worlds, and not just manipulable, programmable, pointsifiable clicksters. You know, so to me, someone has to start it and be saying to the games industry, you need to have your Carnegie moment or your Rockefeller Foundation moment on the very thing that you say you're interested in.
Absolutely. Which is hidden, which is unseen, I would say, for the majority. If you've got friends of ours in multinationals that have spent a heck of a lot of money creating play spaces without the baseline understanding of what is play, why do we play. Pat, with Hue and Cry, did you ever have a hidden track? I'm going to segue to our next piece. Did you ever have like one of those very cool, a hidden track that everyone knew was there? Did you ever do that?
On the B side of the 12-inch of Labour of Love, we had two songs. One of them was a sensitive piano vocal ballad about my auntie passing from cancer. And the other one was a rousing track called The Successes of Monetarism, which was 4 minutes of silence.
Oh, wow.
Send a message.
Stick it to the man-itis, as they say in School of Rock.
That's cool. Okay. I don't know if any other guest is going to ever answer that like so definitively,
Yes.
making a political statement, is sticking it to the society.
Sticking it to the manitis.
Yeah. So, I mean, the reason why we ask is we're now transitioning to, this isn't a hidden track. This is a very, very visible track as part of our podcast where we've kind of asked you to be a little bit playful, and we've posted you some Lego, and we're now going to pose you.
Giving you some homework to do.
Yeah, a little bit of homework.
You
So,
have.
and again, thank you for
It was
doing
brilliant
Yeah.
homework.
Yeah, before actually you unpack your bills, how was the process for you?
Well, I'm sure you know the deep archives of childhood trauma and passion that are unlocked by laying one's hands upon a nubbly Lego brick and seeing how buildable the world is and how fragile those constructions can be, which I may just be about to prove as I fail to lift this off the floor. But I found it to be kind of a rejuvenile experience for the first 30, 40 minutes. And then I totally got into the flow.
Yeah.
And I'm now looking at it, and I've made sure that I've photographed it from all a manner of different angles.
Great.
Because I'll feel bad if I have to sort of disassemble it. But that's the point, right?
Yes.
Absolutely.
The point is that it all goes into the possibility box. And but I thought your prompts were excellent. Very useful. So when you're asking me to talk about this, please remind me of what your prompts were.
So I suppose the first prompt was, what inspires you about your work? What keeps you curious and motivated?
All right. Well, here we go. I think already things are falling off. Stop that. How many times have you seen this, you guys? But anyway, here is the first one. The first one is this field contraption you'll be able to see at the front. I think my answer to that question was, I like the idea that through deep diving into play, through exploring play forms, that people will become new people.
Okay.
New types of people. And so there you can see various vegetable, human, robot, human.
Yeah, they're facing each other. Is that right? Yeah, they're facing
hybrids.
each other.
They're facing each other.
Yeah.
There's a little crazy gel flame there coming up
You
from
see
a
it
very
through the
old,
wheels?
a very old
Yeah.
bit of mechanism. So that's my idea of what powers everything, is this combination of mechanism and sort of fluidity. So there, that was that. So that's the machine for new beings, and for me to make people happy with that profound, externally determined and self-determined rate of change, and that's what Lego does for me.
I like
Awesome.
it. And build number
Okay.
2, or is that it? Yeah, you got it. Build number
Yes,
2.
I've got it.
How do
I've
you
got it
think
right.
your work helps people think and feel differently about the world?
Yeah. So this
Can you bring it back a little bit?
Yeah.
I'll bring
Pull
it back a bit.
towards
There
you
we
and
go.
then tilt it down. There you go. There you go. Beautiful. Oh,
Think. Fine. That's another discussion. Well, again, that people are multiple, and that they can develop in various forms. So each of these bricks are sort of piled on top of each other and twisted as far as they can go. So it's like a kind of a fractal pattern. And on top of them are little heads with flowers on them. There's a dog there as well. I don't know. I'm trying to figure out whether I had a last minute failure of nerve and put a big yellow patriarch at the top, who's looking over the rest of them. I think that's a failure of nerve on my part, for which I apologize. But so that's just the kind of the plurality, people realizing their multiplicity and plurality as a consequence of what I'm doing. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, so build number 3, the final build, was, what curiosity or conundrum do you want to conceptualize with Lego?
Yeah. Can you see that?
yeah,
Yes,
perfectly. Yeah,
perfectly,
great.
Yeah. I mean, essentially, the conundrum I have in my head, and I have it a lot, and sometimes antidepressants deal with it, and sometimes they don't, is the kind of paradox of human creativity. So there's the kind of the red shoot, permanent red spurt of human creativity, sending dark influences off all over the place. Around about that creativity is all the context for it. They do look like buildings are waves, somewhere between a building and a wave, but they are studied with the dark end of things as well, as you can see from these kind of black curves that I found. And that's really I sort of my dark approach as a sort of play thinker is to think of, and this is the darkest possible thought, is that play could be maladaptive. It could actually be maladaptive. I mean, in terms of the ingenuity that it drives, and we're in that at the moment with AI, aren't we? Where people are saying, as they said in the 70s, in terms of genetic engineering, we need to control this, we need to damp it down, we need to stop it for 6 months, we don't know where we're going. But, you can add to that extractive capitalism's effect on the planet. You can add to that, John von Neumann and doing the Cold War and then developing nuclear weapons. There's a certain absurdity to human creativity that it takes us to what Toby Ord calls the precipice. And I struggle with whether that's a patriarchal male thing, that's just what male power has done. And then I struggle with the idea that male power has an element of asocial playfulness to it, play just as sheer disruptive possibility. So there's a lot of to dwell on play is to dwell on some virtuous things, but it's also to dwell on the strangeness of us as animals. And then the final thing I'll say to this is I've been gripped by sort of Fermi's paradox, Fermi's paradox. But the whole idea that the reason why we're so uncontactable in this vast teeming universe is because societies and civilizations trip themselves up with their own ingenuity. The fact that they can manipulate matter at an atomic level it means that they blow themselves up at the same stage, because they're all going through the same. Now, I'd like us obviously to beat Fermi's paradox. That would be nice. And the book I'm writing at the moment, I'll put this down. SUPERPLAY is a kind of meditation, a short meditation on 20 years of the play ethic. But also this dark aspect of human creativity and ingenuity. And I think what I'm hopefully going to get to by the end of the book is, well, these are the structures and institutions and cultural norms that we consciously choose. We actively, consciously choose them in a way that has never been more urgent to actively, consciously choose and shape our society. And SUPERPLAY at the moment seems to be the province of warlords, tech moguls, advertising executives, political technologists of all kinds. That's a top-down SUPERPLAY. A bottom-up SUPERPLAY is that science fictional aspect to the play ethic that I was talking about. That not only that it would be nice to have, but that we probably need to have. We probably need to be in a general situation disconnected from addictive consumer technology, healthier in body, thus healthier in mind, if we're going to get out of this pass. And the one thing I take from my years of studying play is that it's not going to happen, or it could happen through religious hair-shirtery. Shut it all down, shut down your semiosis, simplify your life, have this pure or less complex relationship to the world. That doesn't seem to me credible. We can't go up, we can't go over, we can't go under. We have to go through human creativity to get to the other side, given the restless appetite of imaginative, metacognitive animals that we actually are. So we're going to have to develop a mass SUPERPLAY, and we're going to have to be super players in that sense of coping with the scary complexity of the moment by being different kinds of bigger, more multitudinous selves. So at the time of 2004, when I wrote the book, You know, it's funny. The book halfway through is broken in half by the fact of 2001, September the 11th.
Yep.
You know, so I'm writing the book and I'm thinking, here's this beautiful internet-enabled cultural society, cultural economy, and then along comes literally a bunch of terrorists who say, literally in their message, the time for play is over, the time for death is upon us. Literally, that's what they say. That's the note that they leave behind. And I that was an early tremor to me, you know, of the stakes that are involved in thinking about what we do, about human play, imagination, and creativity. It's not small stakes. It's not just a nice to have. It's not just about new products in the marketplace. It's actually about what human beings do with their unnatural nature, which is to be aware of our existence. So that's what I'm interested in at the moment. But I'm not pulling on a hair shirt. I'm saying we're going to have to deal with human playfulness at its core and in a sort of ontological way. So that's what I'm. So you've led me to my latest thing quite well with that last exercise.
Well,
thank you.
Good. If one of our aspirations is for software development teams to use Lego Serious Play to develop a more playful world, essentially, I'd love if we had an anthem for this super play, which was created by you. So you use the Lego method for this anthem, and Hue and Cry get to #1 globally.
Listen, I have to tell you what. I'm not kidding you. There's something a wee bit psychic about you, because we're just about to finish off our first EDM record.
Okay. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
And it's a banger.
Okay.
But it's been a dialogue with machines.
Right.
You know, with 100 different boxes, all of which do one waveform very, very well. And we turn them on in the morning, and sometimes they're grumpy and they work, sometimes they're overexcited, they work too much. So we've basically been in this kind of ontological dance with not digital machines, but old analog machines, things that have valves in them, that if you listen to their waveform, it's the same sound as Saturn makes or a quasar makes. So this is what we've been involved with in making our record, is we've been literally been involved with the music of the spheres for the new Hue and Cry record. So it's either going to be mutton dressed as lamb, which is always possible, or we're off. That's our vehicle to be exploring SUPERPLAY and a playful relationship with machines that can enhance us rather than substitute us.
That's
It
fantastic.
sounds really exciting. We wish you all the best.
We've got a lot of show notes. There's a lot of
Yeah.
books that are going to be put in there for the show notes for all our listeners. So Pat, look, it's been an honor to have chatted with you, and thank you
likewise.
for helping us,
Yes.
you know, as a company arrive to where we are and where we're hopefully going to go with all this.
And thank you for being such a good sport as well, you know, doing the Lego builds. So we really
Listen, if a guy from the Play Ethic can't do the Lego builds, I don't know who he thinks he is. So just come to patkane.global and I'll talk to you if you want. That's fine.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Pat.
Thank you
It's been
so
a pleasure.
much, Pat. Take care.
now.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.